Thank you all for coming out tonight. Special thanks to my wife Phyllis, with whom I've shared all of this, and shared it, all the ins and outs, all the stresses and strains, the high times, the low times, the lowest times, which I'll talk a little bit about. And thanks also to Carol Keller. I'm glad that Mark mentioned Carol. Carol and I have been working together for the last 17 years, putting together the graduate program in interdisciplinary studies, and then working together on how many events, Carol, have we collaborated like this, but at which I wasn't at the center. I mean, one after the other after the other. So putting this together was a breeze after our experiences. I grew up in the Dexter-Davison neighborhood of Detroit. I grew up believing in progress. But here at Alumni House in April 2013, I'll bet nobody does. Progress, the conviction that human life has improved over time and is continuing to improve in an interconnected process, including the growth of science and technology, the spread and deepening of education, economic growth, social and political developments, including increasing democracy and equality. I can report the disillusionment with progress as a scholar studying the history of the idea. But more importantly, I can report it from my own life experience. It was amazing to contemplate that I have lived over 1/4 of the lifespan of the modern world. And so I think I'm qualified to reflect on progress in my lifetime, in my career at Wayne State, as a native Detroiter, and in over 50 years of political activism. To begin with, I'm part of the American three-generation story of progress. Old country cap maker to first-generation salesman to university professor. My grandfather was a trade union activist, then a small shopkeeper, then a night watchman, who was thrilled by the coming of Social Security. My father dropped out of high school, found his way to selling car insurance, and as more workers bought more cars, he made a good middle-class living. And I went to the local college, Wayne State University. I don't go back here for 45 years. I actually have been here for 57 years. I worked 20 to 30 hours a week while also falling in love with literature, philosophy, and history. Then fell in love with Phyllis. We got married, and we moved to San Francisco. We taught in a two-room country schoolhouse in Northern California. And I found my way eventually to the History of Ideas program at Brandeis. By 1968, I had become a PhD, as well as a socialist and a political activist. I wanted to help bring about a world that was more equal, more fair, more democratic, and that would allow every last person the means to fully develop his or her abilities. I was convinced, and I still am, that this is eminently possible, but requires radically different social arrangements. I came to teach at Wayne for 3 reasons. First, to come back home. It mattered that the Tigers were en route to winning the World Series that year. And it mattered even more that my first daughter, Pamela, would be born here. Just as it matters today that Pam, her husband Todd, and my grandchildren Hannah and Zachary live just a few blocks from us. Second, I came back because of Monteith College, one of the great experiments nationally. Operating in an urban university among largely first-generation students, a small college offering an integrated general education that would teach undergraduates to better understand themselves, their natural and their social world, and to appreciate human culture. And third, it was, after all, 1968. During the years immediately after the 1967 rebellion, as we political people got used to calling it, Detroit was an exciting place for those not moving out to the suburbs, a magnet for radical young spirits, black and white. Here was the home of the Dodge Revolutionary Union Movement, DRUM, of People Against Racism, PAR, of the Fifth Estate, and no less important, of the MC5. Oh, you do know who they were. Kick out the jams. Here at Wayne State, what's the name? I skipped a beat. Here at Wayne State was not only Monteith, but the radical South End. Thanks, Russ. And students who were my own age or even older. With other young faculty, I took the bold step of teaching in jeans. I kid you not, it was a radical step in those days. In response to the Kent State, Jackson State killings in May 1970, a group of us called a demonstration on the Mall that led to the university being shut down in a massive student strike. I led a meeting of faculty that planned an Indochina Institute, we called it, to create alternative classes about relevant political topics for striking students. Long afterwards, friendly colleagues remembered that I chaired the meeting with my sleeping daughter Pamela in a child carrier on my back. You don't remember. You slept through it. Not so friendly colleagues remembered the fact that I had chaired the meeting and had written supportive articles in the South End, was a New Left Marxist, and frequently clashed with a Cold War liberal who thought about ideas separately from social history. When time came for my tenure consideration in 1972, these colleagues discussed my radical politics in the confidential letters sent up to the administration. Although in the minority, through the old boy channels that dominated such decisions, they got the provost and president to side against me. And I was turned down in spring 1973. It wasn't a shock, but it was devastating just the same. It confirmed my worst fear, namely that it was impossible to survive as a radical. We were talking about that in class the other night, right? Many of you knew Saul Wellman. And Saul, for those who don't remember or didn't follow everything Mel said, Saul was a veteran of the International Brigades who was, more than anyone, the moving spirit behind getting Pete Seeger here and kicking off the scholarship fund, which Tony Rothschild and I chaired that event. I had a few months to go, having been turned down for tenure. I had a few months to go before I had to clean out my desk. I was going to leave Wayne State and Detroit forever. Phyllis and I were living in Highland Park at the time. And one morning, Saul Wellman and I were in my kitchen. We were good friends. We just had breakfast and were washing the dishes. That's what we would do together. I was talking, or he would insist on it. I was talking about getting other jobs, moving away, and Saul looked at me sternly and said, "You're not an academic nomad. This is your home. You belong here." It was actually very hard to hear those words because it meant stay here and fight. And it was hard because it was going to be so painful to stick it out. You know, in America we move on from painful things. And Saul was saying, don't move on. Stay here and fight it. Because that meant arguing, writing letters, mobilizing, asking for help. It meant waiting. It meant feeling the pain. Saul not only urged making a struggle of it, but then, characteristically, he picked up a pencil and paper and asked, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? How are we going to organize it? Who do we go to first? In fact, Saul and I went just a few blocks away, down Hamilton in Highland Park, to the headquarters of the Lithographers Local, where Jerry Deneau was Secretary-Treasurer. Jerry was my age, a militant young printer who had worked with Saul, Saul's main calling after leaving the Communist Party. Jerry had gone to the labor school, where I had taught, and found his way, along with several others, into a study group on Marxism that Ernie Benjamin and I had led. Ernie later became a dean here and went on to be the National Secretary of the American Association of University Professors. Between Jerry and I, that began a 40-year friendship. Jerry died last June. He immediately got to work connecting me with other trade unionists, and he and Saul helped me reshape my personal pain into a struggle involving many others, eventually including the UAW. The faculty had just succeeded bringing collective bargaining to Wayne State, and my case was one of the first taken up by the AAUP's grievance coordinator. It was clearly, he felt, a case of political discrimination, and he started the ball rolling to file a grievance and go through the new hearing process that we had just adopted, especially because someone had helped us sneak a look at the confidential letters. And we knew there were clear references to my politics in them. No one here from the administration? Don't write that down. That was Deputy President Phyllis Ivory Room in the back. I say Phyllis Ivory Room, I'm very keen about her middle name, which was her last name when I knew her at Central High School, because she's the daughter of Marcellus Ivory, the first African-American vice president of the UAW.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
The AAUP provided their attorney in this process, and I also hired my own, the radical firebrand, Ron Riasti. Ron here? Where's Ron? Okay. More about Ron in a second. There were debates about how to handle the case. Should I be very low-key? Or should I be really out there with my politics? Ron was a Trotskyist who insisted that my activism mattered most, including my labor school activity, my support for such radical programs as Black Studies, Chicano-Boricua Studies, and Women's Studies. The arbitrator, Ed Wise, a constitutional lawyer, decided that my Marxist beliefs might make an interesting case. But even more glaring was the fact that in insisting that they didn't care about my underlying political convictions, the other side stressed in the hearings that what they opposed were my efforts to promote the new radical programs. This, Ed Wise found, was just as much, and I'm virtually quoting because you never forget certain words, this was just as much a violation of my First Amendment rights, and therefore it was inadmissible to deny me tenure on these grounds. The eventual result, 2 years later, tenure, back pay, and did we have a celebration? We lived in the former mayor's house on Puritan in Highland Park, so we had 3 floors, and over 100 people turned up to the celebration. We had a live band, streaking. Does everybody know what streaking is? Somebody don't know? You know. Okay, we don't have to. I don't want to embarrass my grandkids. Running through. She knows. Okay. Police were sent to the house to quiet us down at 2 a.m. I had my job. I remember Pam saying, "Daddy, does that mean you're not going to get fired? You'll keep your job?" And I said, "As long as they don't abolish the college." The job was thanks to collective bargaining. It was thanks to Detroit's union culture and Detroit's political history. Mike Einhauser, the student leader of the Monteith demonstration on my behalf, and Millie Jeffries, the first woman vice president of the UAW, were elected to the university's board of governors. And this settled the issue of my tenure. I lived with a sense of progress and hope based on struggle. The Vietnam War was just over, and I was back teaching at Wayne. The Old Boy Network and confidential letters no longer decided tenure here. Huge step forward. But not so fast with the progress story. I mentioned Monteith and Pam's question to me. Within a year, Monteith College was killed. Stupidly, really, for no good reason. Also, the new left faded. Detroit was in a decline that hasn't stopped to this day, despite Whole Foods, Dave Gilbert, and Midtown. Nationally, although it took some time to dawn on us, the 30 golden post-war years, 1945 to 1975, were over. From the right, in response to OPEC and inflation and lower profits and new opportunities offshore, came the call for an unregulated free market, dismantling social benefits, and a new individualism. Ronald Reagan ushered it in with his crushing of the Air Traffic Controllers Union. This whole new environment, along with wide awareness, was dawning on most of us at the time, of severe environmental problems, began to challenge my sense of progress. Soon, sophisticated intellectuals were relegating progress to the status of an obsolete grand narrative. But even as many aspects of our world underwent an unmistakable decline, others definitely seem to be improving. The activism of women and African Americans, among others, was making this country a freer, more tolerant, and more inclusive society. I personally was honored to become part of the struggle against apartheid, making 3 trips to South Africa. As Roz said, the first was during the state of emergency in 1987. And the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, to which I devoted several years of writing and activism, seemed for a brief moment to be reaching the turning point of mutual recognition, which we thought would result in an end of the occupation and a 2-state solution. Not yet. At the university, after Monteith, I went to the weekend college, later called the Interdisciplinary Studies Program. At IES, for over 30 years, we have the privilege of being part of another unique small college program at the large university. This one for working adults, product of the genius of Otto Feinstein, where everyone, students, instructors, and counselors, knew each other by first name. Our typical student was a black single-parent woman aged just under 40 who worked for Blue Cross and attended class 1 or 2 nights a week. She would come to class directly from work, having called home to make sure the children had eaten and done their homework, picking up some fast food on the way and eating it in the car. She hung in, despite family, work, time, and financial stresses, and thoroughly enjoyed the open-ended discussion and small group interaction. Moreover, she had high levels of self-discipline and enough motivation to come to class ready to participate. To graduate, she prepared a senior essay on a topic of special interest, which she defended at an oral exam before 3 of her professors. And I'm thrilled to see many of my colleagues from that program here. And I'm also thrilled to see many of our graduates, both from the undergraduate program and the graduate program. Despite our open admissions, our graduation rate was actually higher than the rest of the university. And we were nationally recognized as a model program for adult learners. These facts weren't enough to diffuse the uncomprehending hostility of many of our elitist wannabe colleagues. They scornfully called us remedial. Open admissions at Wayne State? And once our protector, believe it or not, our protector, David Adamany, departed, it was only a matter of time before some program-destroying provost would use the excuse of budget cutbacks to mobilize the resentment and get us killed. This was ratified, I have to say, by our allies, several liberal Democrats on the Board of Governors. I still can't decide whether they were spineless or just gullible. What conclusions do I draw from the ups and downs during all these years? I used to think that my teaching and scholarly and political writings, my activism, ranging from community organizing in the ghetto of New Brunswick, New Jersey, to participation in Occupy Detroit almost 50 years later, all the marching against the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the war in Afghanistan, my work with New American Movement, Democratic Socialists of America, the Huntington Woods Peace Group, and there are people here from all these groups, and I'm so happy to see you. I used to think that all of this work was, making however tiny, however molecular, a slight difference. I'm contributing my grain of sand. I think a lot of people here, we reconcile ourselves, we solace ourselves with the grain of sand notion. Why do we say that? Well, we say it because we're trying to rescue some meaning from a confusing, contradictory picture of all the ups and downs in the story of our lives, the city, our collective history in this country, the world. But clearly, we no longer have any coherent sense of progress as thinkers like Condorcet or Marx saw it. We're very far from their optimism. Even though, in my lifetime, I've witnessed the remarkable spread of education, the growth of science, technology, productivity, life-prolonging medical practices, rational self-understandings and forms of social organization, instant communications to and from every spot in the world. Despite all of these truly fabulous modern powers, I'm forced to conclude that the Enlightenment faith in progress has turned out to be an illusion. Why? The dazzling technologies and amazing increases in human power can prolong life, yes, but they've killed millions of people in foreign and civil wars and genocide. And modern economies and social systems have replaced traditional insecurities with thoroughly modern ones. Today, for example, the bottom line of global consumer and financial capitalism not only closes factories and moves jobs overseas, but produces banking crises and generates constant insecurity. Closer to home, at Wayne State, my wonderful junior colleagues indeed have much less to fear about tenure and promotion than in my time. And they can take comfort from a solid system of protections. But they know, we all know, that we're becoming governed by the bottom line here at this university as elsewhere. The latest national study says that only 1 in every 4 instructors students encounter are tenured or on the tenure track. The rest are adjuncts, grad students, and temporary. Moreover, students face the outrageous fact, duplicated nowhere else in the world, of graduating owing tens of thousands of dollars for their education. My younger daughter, Nina, will be well into her 40s when she finally pays off her college loans. So, Should I then be speaking only of ups and downs, of unconnected and conflicting trends, going every which way, some benefiting everyone, some only the 1%, some making the earth less habitable, some expanding human rights, some connecting us around the world, some making us more isolated and incapable of collective action? Facing this confusing, contradictory picture, should I conclude that reality is messy? Well, of course it is. But I also regard the how confusing conclusion as a cop-out, a refusal to connect the dots. After all, things are always confusing, but they also reveal patterns. The dots can be connected to reveal several significant historical trends. The first and most obvious has to do with the dynamism and power of our capitalist economy, both local and global. This was first and is still best appreciated by none other than Karl Marx in his breathless sketch in the Communist Manifesto. The several pages, some of you know this, the several pages climax by all that is solid melts into air. Although Marxism as a movement is over, that's one of the arguments of my book, After Marxism, as publications like, and I know some of you will disagree with me, as publications like Time and Newsweek and The Economist pointed out at the beginning of the Great Recession 5 years ago, Marxist analysis remains a key to understanding the dynamics of capitalism. I didn't say that. The publications of the bourgeoisie said that. I would add that Marxist analysis helps us to understand the ways in which the economy and its logic dominate the rest of our lives, right down to our attitudes and values. Our capitalist economy totally depends on and feeds a sense of constant and endless innovation in the production of goods and services. It depends on creating new wants. All of this is done for one reason, and only one reason. Not to improve human life, not to make people happier, not to better the world. The one reason is, I won't play the professor. The one reason is profit. The one reason is profit. I was going to ask you, but I'm going to get used to being retired. I'll say it, I won't. Okay, but today we're finding out that we become trapped in the drive for profit. Everything we do and touch and are seems increasingly informed by the imperative for growth, development, and change. Today, it increasingly subjects all corners of existence to what I would regard as a kind of free market totalitarianism. A maelstrom of progress sweeps everything in its path. Our lives, our society, everything down to, well, even the air we breathe. The average person today in the advanced society disposes over more power than the kings and emperors of old. But I would argue that the time is long past when this kind of productive and technological progress meant human progress. It doesn't mean human progress anymore. Creating new wants? iPhones are nice, but do they really help us to live better? To strengthen our abilities to solve our collective problems? I'll repeat, do they help us strengthen our abilities to solve the really meaningful collective problems we face? No. To make us richer human beings? Instead, I'd argue, the logic of the consumer society traps all of us. We, its beneficiaries, are its victims. The logic of profit is one major historical trend. Another, very different one, has been the progress in human social morality. During the modern age, a complex logic has moved from place to place and time to time, from demanding more democratic government to rejecting the harshest and most brutal forms of oppression, such as being others' property, to demanding equality, self-determination, and a decent living. People have picked up the baton, set down by other people at other times and other movements, and have gone further. Slavery has been abolished. Foreign occupation and colonial rule have been largely ended. Government-mandated segregation has become illegal in the United States. Women are more and more equal to men. And at this very moment, same-sex marriage is advancing by leaps and bounds. Specific oppressions have become unacceptable, immoral, illegal, even obsolete. That's progress. In our own lives, we do make a molecular contribution to such changes just by teaching our children to accept people of different racial, religious, and ethnic backgrounds, and by living new forms of love relationships. My grandchildren experience none of the nasty racial climate or religious hostility I saw all around me growing up. Indeed, 2 of them living in Chicago will soon be learning about their own Taino, African, and Spanish histories and will become bilingual to keep that heritage alive. My 14-year-old granddaughter, Hannah, has been working on a debate project arguing for same-sex marriage. And all of my grandchildren are being raised by both of their parents as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That's progress. Such progress causes attitudes to change, as well as practices, laws, language, and even identities. We're becoming different people in many respects. And so struggles for equality and self-determination and to live better do yield concrete results which may accumulate over time. People have also fought for well-being and security, demanding eliminating poverty, a living wage, secure employment, reducing inequality, adequate health care, social security. But over the past generation, those in control in the United States economic system have imposed a negative progress, a push to dismantle social protections won at great effort, a systematic effort to shrink trade unions, the welfare state, public schools, government provision, even government itself, even the idea that we are a community, a collectivity, a society. Other advanced countries do better by their people. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark are still committed to their protections and to retaining them and not following what they regard as the example of American predatory capitalism. That's an official Norwegian government publication. So I'm talking about different kinds of progress. One trend places the products of human activity beyond our collective control and subjects us to them. Another is about humans rejecting being oppressed and demanding equality and even well-being. You don't have to agree with me about any of this, and I know some of you will disagree strongly. I even thought I heard a yes when I asked about the iPhone, making life better from my own family. But in any case, working on this is one of my retirement projects, making sense of the ambivalence of progress. There is another type of progress that allows me to even contemplate doing this work, advances in medicine. I underwent open heart surgery at Sinai Grace Hospital 3 years ago. I'm alive today only because of a system of medicine that has developed over hundreds and thousands of years, although its most significant achievements have come during the last 80 years. 80 years ago, my grandfather died of a heart attack at a young age, 53 years. Without the last 30 years of heart technology and technique, just the last 30 years, the same would have happened to me. It made my heart catheterization and angiogram an ordinary diagnostic tool. And this advance made my open heart surgery into a routine 5-hour procedure. Every one of us, heart patients or not, draws on this medical progress when we so much as take an annual physical at the doctor's office. This kind of progress isn't the result of some transcendent historical force or invisible hand magically coordinating the separate activities of countless individuals, you know, libertarianism, but rather stems from a cumulative, collective human effort to improve life and to see that those improvements, more and more, are shared widely. I hope then to retire free from basic survival cares, as long as Social Security and Medicare are still around and around at their current levels. As you know, these aren't entitlements, but cooperative programs that I, like anyone else, have been paying into my entire life. The attack on them is a deliberate attack on the social progress made during the last 2 generations. So my well-being and aging depends on past, but also current social and political struggles. And these results, the results of those struggles, are very much up in the air today. I would love to lie in my hammock, which, as my grandson Zachary knows, is very comfortable. And I'd like to just be able to relax in that hammock. But to do so, I'll have to spend at least some time emailing, phoning, planning, meeting, and demonstrating. I'm not going to be able to sit back because human progress, or even holding our own against the drive to subject every last space to the pursuit of profit, demands conscious, collective human activity. So, as I bid goodbye to gainful employment, I approach the next phase of my life with anger as well as gratitude. Much fear and some hope. I've been privileged to be able to study and write about the social movements of my lifetime. I've also been privileged to be part of these with many of you, sometimes huge movements and filled with hope, sometimes pitifully small and discouraged ones. But we've always kept on, and with a lot of you, I will keep studying and keep on keeping on.
All right.